Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Silence is rarely empty. In the moments when sound ceases, we feel a weight, a presence just beyond the edge of perception. In certain places around the world, this silence takes on a life of its own. It is not the calm of a gentle evening, nor the pause between storms. It is heavier, almost tangible, as if the air itself is listening, waiting. Ancient cultures believed that silence could be a sign, a message from forces unseen. Some whispered that where no bird sings and no leaf stirs, the dead still roam, observing, guarding, or perhaps longing for release. Travelers who stumble upon such places often describe an odd sensation, like stepping through a threshold between worlds. The very fabric of reality seems to shift. They notice first that the familiar sounds of life fade. The crunch of footsteps on gravel disappears. The rustle of clothing, the hum of insects, the distant bark of a dog, all vanish. At first, the absence of sound feels like relief, a momentary escape from the noise of the living world. But as seconds stretch into minutes, unease grows. The silence feels deliberate, almost expectant, as though it is aware of their presence. Across the centuries, folklore has captured this unsettling phenomenon in countless forms. In Europe, tales speak of valleys where voices vanish mid-sentence. In Asia, hidden temples shun the noise of the outside world, and the very walls seem to absorb all sound. Even in the deserts of the Middle East, nomads tell of stretches of sand where neither wind nor footsteps disturb the stillness. What all these stories share is a common thread. Silence is not neutral. It is an actor in the story, an entity capable of instilling fear and awe alike. Scientists have long attempted to explain these places. Acoustic anomalies, peculiar air currents, and unique geological formations have all been proposed as reasons why sound behaves strangely in certain locations. Yet no purely natural explanation can account for the way those who enter describe the silence. They speak of an oppressive weight, a sensation of being watched or measured. Some report hearing faint echoes of voices that should not exist, whispers that seem to come from beneath the earth rather than around them. Others say the silence is almost a language of its own, subtle cues and shifts in perception that communicate something ancient and knowing. To the mind attuned to folklore, this silence becomes more than a scientific curiosity. It is a boundary, a liminal space where the living and the dead brush against one another. Shamans, monks, and priests from around the world have noted such places as sacred, dangerous, or both. They often perform rituals designed to honor the quiet, leaving offering or chanting prayers to keep the restless spirits contained. In some traditions, even speaking too loudly in these zones is considered disrespectful or dangerous, capable of stirring forces that should remain dormant. It is in these moments, when even the smallest noises are swallowed, that we begin to understand how sound defines reality. Without it, our senses sharpen unnaturally. We notice the faintest vibrations beneath our feet, a subtle shift in air as though it breathes, the distant scent of decay or damp earth that might otherwise go unnoticed. Silence, it seems, opens a door to perception that ordinary life rarely allows. Some who have spent time in these places claim that even memory is altered. The mind struggles to fill the void, imagining sounds, voices, footsteps that were never there. And in that void, fear can take root, growing heavier with each heartbeat, until it feels as though the silence itself is pressing against the chest. Legends often describe this silence as alive, a presence rather than a mere absence. Ancient texts from various cultures describe the phenomenon in surprisingly similar terms. The Norse called it hell's breath, a chilling quiet that could descend upon the valleys where the dead wandered. In Japan, temples hidden deep in bamboo forests are said to be inhabited by spirits of those who died unheard, their cries absorbed by the very air. In South America, travelers speak of riverbanks where birds refuse to sing, where the jungle itself seems to hold its breath, as though mourning some invisible catastrophe. Each culture framed it differently, but the underlying recognition is the same. Silence can carry intent. When exploring these stories, one begins to notice the patterns. The dead places are often places of tragedy or loss, where something unnatural has lingered long after its cause has faded. They are corners of the world where history weighs upon the present, where echoes of past events are felt rather than heard. The environment becomes a canvas upon which the past imprints itself, and silence is the medium. To step into such a place is to become part of that echo, to tread lightly in a space where the usual rules of sound, and perhaps even life, no longer apply. In modern times, travelers continue to be drawn to these cursed quiet zones, some seeking the thrill of fear, others chasing the inexplicable. Reports are consistent. Electronic devices falter, compasses spin without reason, and GPS signals fail. Even cameras capture shadows that seem to move independently of light. And always the silence remains. It is patient, unyielding, indifferent to disbelief. Whether it is a natural quirk of the world or a remnant of something far older, it commands attention, and those who enter cannot ignore it. Perhaps this is why the dead places are so compelling. We are creatures of sound. Our language, our music, our connection to the world depends on it. When it is stripped away, we are forced to confront a different reality, one that may have been there all along, just beyond the reach of our ears. And in that confrontation, fear and fascination entwine. We feel watched, not by a being with eyes, but by the silence itself, as though it listens, waits, and remembers. Some travelers describe the feeling as a weight on their chest, subtle but insistent, as if the very air is pressing in around them. Others speak of a strange vertigo, not of height, but of reality itself tilting slightly, unsteady underfoot. Time, too, behaves strangely in these places. Moments stretch, bend, and fold, until a single minute can feel like an eternity. The mind begins to fill the gaps left by sound, conjuring images and sensations that are not there, whispering to itself in tones that feel almost alive. And in those whispers, one can sense a presence, patient and watchful, as if the silence itself is aware of the intrusion. Across history, countless cultures have identified these zones as sacred or cursed, depending on their perspective. In the forests of Eastern Europe, villagers spoke of the hollow woods, where animals refused to enter, and those who ventured too far often returned altered, quiet, and withdrawn, their eyes haunted by what they could not name. In some cases, entire settlements avoided these areas, leaving them to nature and the dead alike. Shamans would perform ceremonies at the edge, offering prayers or small tokens to the unseen inhabitants, hoping to maintain a fragile balance. To disrupt the silence was to invite misfortune, or worse, to awaken a presence that had been patiently waiting for centuries. Stories persist of explorers who attempted to document these dead places, recording sound only to find their tapes void, instruments registering nothing, even when they were certain of activity. Scientists have tried to explain these phenomena with topography, atmospheric pressure, and acoustic shadowing, but the explanations often fail to capture the lived experience of those who visit. In some valleys, sound seems to be absorbed entirely, swallowed by the land itself. Voices vanish mid-utterance. Echoes fade before they should. And even the hum of life, wind through leaves, insects moving, distant waterfalls, cannot penetrate the oppressive stillness. The psychological effect is undeniable. Humans rely on sound to orient themselves in the world. When it is removed, every heartbeat, every movement becomes amplified. The imagination, untethered by the usual noise of life, begins to weave its own pattern. Visitors often report hearing whispers, voices speaking languages they cannot understand, or faint calls that seem to come from far below the earth. Others describe a low hum, not mechanical but organic, vibrating just beneath the skin, as though the silence is speaking a language older than words. It is here that fear and curiosity entwine, drawing some further in while driving others away. Some researchers have speculated that these zones may exist at the intersection of natural and supernatural forces. They are often located in areas with a history of trauma, battlefields, sites of ritual, or places where untimely deaths have occurred. Folklore suggests that spirits linger in such spaces, bound by unresolved emotion, and that silence is the residue of their presence. Unlike conventional hauntings, these areas do not manifest with visible apparitions or sudden cold spots. Instead, they are subtle, almost imperceptible, affecting perception and awareness, making each step feel deliberate, measured, and watched. Legends describe these silent spaces with remarkable similarity across cultures, hinting at a shared understanding of their power. In some Native American traditions, there are stretches of forest known as spirit paths, where the earth itself absorbs sound, ensuring the passage of spirits remains undisturbed by mortal noise. In parts of Africa, travelers speak of mute valleys, where even the wind dies in midair, as if honoring some ancient covenant with the unseen. In East Asia, temples hidden deep within mountains are deliberately constructed to trap silence, amplifying it until the living are made acutely aware of their intrusion into sacred space. Each story carries the same lesson. Silence is not empty, and it is never accidental. Even today, these places continue to draw those who seek the unusual or the uncanny. Modern explorers equipped with cameras and recording devices often find that their equipment fails inexplicably. GPS units lose signal, radios fall silent, and microphones capture nothing, as if the technology itself is being denied entry into this strange realm. It is not a malevolent force in the traditional sense, but rather a boundary, a marker between the mundane world and something older, more patient, and infinitely aware. People who spend too long within these spaces sometimes emerge changed, speaking more slowly, listening more intently, as if the quiet has left a permanent impression on their senses and consciousness. And yet, for all the accounts, all the scientific investigations, and all the folklore, the true nature of these silent zones remains a mystery. Are they remnants of ancient magic, echoes of a past long buried, or simply quirks of the natural world that humans have imbued with supernatural significance? Perhaps they are all of these things at once. Perhaps the silence is a message we are only beginning to understand, a cautionary note left in the world for those who dare to listen too closely. It is both inviting and terrifying, offering insight and dread in equal measure. One of the most unsettling aspects of these silent zones is how they seem to resist life itself. Visitors often remark that not a single bird sings, not a single insect hums. Even the wind, which moves freely elsewhere, seems to bow to the stillness. In some forests, leaves hang motionless on branches long after the surrounding air is shifted. Streams may flow, but their rush is muted, almost imperceptible, as if water itself obeys the command of the silence. This absence of life, or at least the appearance of absence, feeds a peculiar fear. Humans are accustomed to sound as a measure of vitality, and when that measure disappears, so too does our sense of safety. Consider the story of a dense forest in northern Europe, where locals call it the Hollow Woods. For generations, the villagers spoke of travelers vanishing without a trace. Those who dared to enter the forest reported that even shouts for help would dissipate, leaving only a haunting echo that felt far too deliberate to be random. Animals, normally indifferent to human presence, refused to enter. Deer would halt at the edge. Birds would fly overhead without a single chirp. Hounds refused to follow their masters. Those who emerged from the forest often did so change, quiet, haunted, carrying an unshakable unease. Some claimed they had glimpsed shadows moving independently of the trees, glimpses of figures neither human nor animal. Others swore that, when they tried to speak, their words failed to leave their mouths, swallowed by the forest's oppressive quiet. In East Asia, a similar story unfolds in a hidden mountain temple, long abandoned and overgrown. Travelers describe the path leading to it as unnaturally still. Insects stop mid-flight, leaves do not rustle underfoot, and distant waterfalls are reduced to imperceptible murmurs. Local folklore insists that this temple was consecrated to a deity of stillness, a guardian of the boundary between the living and the dead. Monks who once lived there practiced silence so extreme that even their thoughts were guided by ritual. It was said that any sound introduced to the temple would anger the deity, provoking consequences that could last for generations. Visitors today report an overwhelming sense of being observed, as if the temple itself remembers every visitor, cataloging their presence in some manner beyond human comprehension. Across continents, similar legends emerge, suggesting that dead silence is not a cultural accident, but a universal recognition of a phenomenon too profound to ignore. In the deserts of the Middle East, Bedouin tribes speak of stretches of sand where neither wind nor footsteps disturb the stillness. They call it the plain of the sleeping jinn, claiming that centuries ago vengeful spirits were bound by a powerful exorcist, leaving the desert eternally hushed. Travelers report seeing shifting dunes and mirages, yet hearing nothing. No crunch of sand, no distant call of an animal. The absence of sound becomes almost tactile, a sensation pressing on the skin and nerves, leaving a lasting impression on anyone who dares cross it. Psychologists suggest that the human brain is not well adapted to such profound quiet. Sound is our primary tool for situational awareness, guiding us through danger and communication. When it is removed entirely, the mind fills in the gaps, creating its own narratives. In silent zones, people report hearing whispers or distant calls that are not there, footsteps of unseen companions, or even musical tones carried on the wind that seems absent. Some theorists call this phantom sound, a neurological response to extreme deprivation. But for those who experience it firsthand, the explanation offers little comfort. The experience feels deliberate, as if something outside the human mind is orchestrating the effect. Interestingly, silence in these places often interacts with memory and perception. Visitors frequently report altered senses of time, recalling events in ways that seem disconnected from reality. One may feel hours have passed when only minutes have elapsed. Others describe vivid impressions of past tragedies, almost as if the land itself stores emotion, grief, and fear like a living archive. Folklore often interprets these experiences as a communion with the dead, a fleeting glimpse into a world just out of reach. The silence in these interpretations is not merely an absence. It is a presence, a medium through which the living may brush against forces beyond comprehension. Some of the most compelling accounts come from explorers who attempt to measure or capture these zones scientifically. Microphones record nothing, cameras sometimes capture distortions, and instruments fail without explanation. Even advanced recording equipment designed to detect minute vibrations struggles to function properly. Yet these technological failures do not diminish the human experience. Those who walk these silent places continue to report the same feelings, a heavy awareness, the sensation of being watched, and the unnerving impression that the silence itself is alive, patient, and eternal. The most unnerving aspect of these dead zones is how they seem to exist outside the ordinary flow of life. In many accounts, the absence of sound is coupled with an absence of movement, or at least movement as we expect it. Trees sway, but leaves remain fixed. Rivers run, yet their babble is muted, as if the water itself hesitates to disturb the air. Even the sun and shadows feel different, moving slower, bending reality ever so slightly. It is in these subtle distortions that travelers sense the presence of something beyond comprehension, an intelligence or force that does not need form to be felt. Ancient rituals often acknowledge this strange power of silence. Across the world, monks, shamans, and priests recognized the significance of stillness in connecting with realms unseen. In Japan, for instance, hidden temples in the mountains are designed to amplify silence, ensuring that every footstep, every breath is conscious and deliberate. Local legends warn that those who violate this stillness risk inciting the spirits that dwell within. Offerings, prayers, and chants were not performed to entertain the divine, but to appease the presence that inhabits absence itself. In Europe, Celtic druids would retreat to deep forests to meditate in silence, believing that stillness was a bridge to the other world, allowing them to hear the whispers of ancestors and spirits alike. The psychological impact of prolonged exposure to these silent zones is profound. Visitors often describe a heightened awareness of their own bodies, noticing the rhythm of their heartbeat and breath in ways that are nearly overwhelming. Some experience a sense of hyper-consciousness, where every movement, every thought is magnified. Others describe a creeping dread, a feeling that something unseen is observing their every action. The mind begins to interpret this absence as presence, the silence as a form of communication. Every pause and every gap becomes meaningful, as though the land itself is speaking a language humans have almost forgotten. Folklore from South America tells of valleys where silence is considered sacred and dangerous. Shamans speak of spirit mirrors, places where the dead and the living intersect. Travelers report that stepping into these zones evokes vivid visions, glimpses of past events frozen in time, faint murmurs of voices long gone, or the sensation of footsteps that follow even when no one is there. In these accounts, silence is not simply the absence of sound, but a vessel for memory, grief, and the lingering presence of souls who cannot rest. The quiet becomes a medium, allowing the living to encounter echoes of those who have passed. Some researchers suggest that these experiences may be explained by natural phenomena such as acoustic anomalies, temperature inversions, or magnetic disturbances. Yet even the most rigorous scientific explanations cannot fully account for the reports of altered perception, phantom sounds, and the pervasive sense of being watched. The consistency of these accounts across continents and centuries hints at a shared human recognition of something that defies conventional understanding. It is as though silence itself is a constant, a language older than words, carrying meaning that transcends culture and time. Stories also suggest that prolonged exposure to these silent zones can change a person's relationship with the world. Travelers who spend hours or days within them often return quieter, more introspective, as if the very essence of the place has imprinted itself upon their consciousness. Some describe a lingering awareness, a heightened sensitivity to sound and presence in everyday life. Others speak of dreams in which the silence returns, pressing in, enveloping, and reminding them that these zones exist in ways that cannot be fully captured by memory or recording. Across folklore and modern reports, a pattern emerges. Silence is rarely passive. It shapes perception, alters experience, and imposes itself upon those who enter. In some traditions, it is viewed as protective, keeping malevolent forces contained. In others, it is ominous, a harbinger of misfortune or death. But everywhere, it commands respect. No visitor leaves unchanged, for even disbelief does not grant immunity. The very act of witnessing these spaces is transformative, revealing that sound is not merely a tool of the living, but a tether that connects us to the world and to one another. When that tether is removed, we glimpse a reality unbound, raw, and infinitely mysterious. Ultimately, the dead silence of these haunted places challenges our understanding of existence. It reminds us that absence can be as powerful as presence, that what is not spoken or heard may still hold immense weight. It draws attention to the thin veil between life and the unseen, urging caution, reverence, and wonder. To enter such a place is to confront the unknown directly, to step into a space where the rules of the everyday are suspended. And in that confrontation, we begin to sense the profound truth whispered by all cultures, all legends, and all explorers who have walked in the dead quiet. That silence is never empty, and in its stillness, the world remembers. Hidden among the jagged peaks of northern Europe lies a valley that travelers speak of in hushed tones, even among themselves. It is known to locals as the Valley of Lost Echoes, though many simply call it the valley that swallows voices. To enter is to step into a realm where the familiar rules of sound no longer apply. Birds do not sing, wind does not stir the trees, and the human voice itself seems to be rejected by the very air. Those who have wandered too far often return pale, silent, haunted by the sensation that something invisible has listened to their every word. Legends surrounding the valley stretch back centuries. The Norse once whispered that it was a gateway to hell, the underworld, where the dead walked freely among the living. It was said that anyone who raised their voice within the valley risked attracting the attention of spirits who hungered not for life, but for the echoes of life itself. Travelers who shouted for help sometimes reported hearing their own voices return to them, warped and twisted into languages they had never spoken, uttered in tones that chilled the blood. The valley, it seemed, had a memory of sound, a consciousness that could manipulate and reshape it at will. Stories passed down through generations describe the valley as deceptively beautiful. A river runs through it, glinting in the sun, flanked by lush greenery that invites curiosity. Yet all movement feels uncanny. Animals avoid the valley entirely. Deer hesitate at its edge, birds circle above without landing, and insects vanish as if swallowed by the air. Shepherds who once grazed their flocks along the outer ridges discovered, to their horror, that the bells around the animals fell silent. Entire herds went missing, leaving no trace beyond flattened grass and the eerie stillness of the land itself. Those who dared to venture deeper often experienced phenomena that defy conventional explanation. Some claimed to hear footsteps trailing them, even when the ground was empty. Whispers seemed to rise from the very walls of the valley, repeating the last words they had spoken before entry, distorted and alien. Travelers would sometimes call out to companions only to find their own words swallowed, replaced by an unnatural silence that pressed against the eardrums with almost physical weight. The air itself felt alive, expectant, as though it had a consciousness waiting to judge or remember those who trespassed. Attempts to document the valley with instruments and recordings often ended in frustration. Microphones captured nothing. Cameras occasionally recorded faint shadows that had no source, and compasses spun erratically. Modern explorers noted that radio signals were interrupted, and even GPS devices lost accuracy within its bounds. Scientific explanations have ranged from unusual air pressure patterns to magnetic anomalies caused by iron deposits in the surrounding rock. While these factors might account for some of the observed phenomena, they fail to capture the subjective experience, the creeping sense that the valley is not just a place, but an entity aware of those who enter. Local folklore is rich with tales of individuals who disappeared entirely within the valley. One story tells of a young traveler who, curious and bold, entered the valley with the intention of mapping its length. Weeks later, a search party found the man's notes scattered at the edge, each page blank except for his last entry. A single line written in trembling script that read, "It spoke my name. He was never found." Other accounts speak of travelers who emerged changed, quiet, withdrawn, haunted by memories of sounds that no one else could hear. Some claim to see figures in the distance, not quite human, not quite shadow, moving with a deliberate grace, vanishing when approached. The valley's silence is not passive. It interacts with the human mind in ways that feel almost predatory. Some explorers reported a phenomenon where the longer they remained within its boundaries, the more difficult it became to recall ordinary sounds. The rustle of leaves, the babble of a stream, the call of a bird. These familiar noises seem to fade from memory, replaced by an oppressive awareness of absence. The mind begins to fill in the gaps, creating phantom whispers, footsteps, or distant calls. In some cases, this led to panic, confusion, or an overwhelming sense of being watched by something unseen yet undeniably present. Legends speak of ancient rituals performed at the valley's edges. Norse shamans would leave offerings of food and carved tokens, chanting prayers to appease the spirits that ruled the land. They believed that the valley itself was a repository of memory, a living archive of sound and life that had been absorbed over centuries. To disturb it was dangerous. Those who failed to respect the boundary risked losing not only their voices, but their minds, their very sense of self becoming entangled in the valley's quiet, indistinguishable from the echoes it held. Even today, hikers and explorers and paranormal enthusiasts are drawn to the valley, tempted by its beauty and the promise of encountering the inexplicable. Many report an eerie anticipation upon arrival, a tension that is almost tactile, as if the air itself is waiting to judge them. Stepping into its depths, they experience the familiar world fading away. Sounds of civilization, footsteps behind them, the wind brushing against skin, all of it disappears. In its place, a silence that feels alive takes hold, patient, deliberate, and infinitely observant. Those who leave the valley often describe a lingering effect, an internal echo of the stillness that follows them, shaping their thoughts, their dreams, and their perception of the world long after they have returned. Many accounts emphasize the valley's ability to distort perception, making travelers question the boundaries between reality and imagination. Those who linger too long often report a sense that the land itself is aware of their thoughts, as though silence is not mere absence, but a form of sentience. Some describe the sensation of hearing words before they are spoken, as if the valley anticipates their actions, reflecting the inner fears of those who dare enter. The longer one remains, the more disorienting the experience becomes. A casual step can feel like a deliberate intrusion. A whisper imagined can echo with authority, and the line between self and the valley blurs. Local stories tell of families who once lived near the valley, avoiding its depths for generations. One tale recounts a shepherd who, curious and bold, led his flock toward the inner valleys. The bells around the sheep grew silent first. Then the animals themselves hesitated, their movements frozen, as if the valley had reached out to restrain them. By nightfall, the shepherd returned alone, his voice gone, unable to call out to the lost animals. He wandered the village in silence, pointing to the valley, eyes wide with terror, muttering only in gestures. Those who tried to comfort him spoke of an uncanny stillness that seemed to emanate from the man himself, a reflection of the valley's influence lingering in his body long after he had escaped its reach. Explorers who have studied the valley note that its geography seems purposefully arranged to amplify the silence. The high cliffs that line its sides reflect sound back upon itself, absorbing echoes and creating an acoustic void. Some scientists suggest that this could explain why voices vanish and why natural noises seem so muted. Yet these explanations fail to account for the subjective phenomena reported consistently. Whispers of unknown origin, sudden chills in the air, and the feeling of being watched by something that cannot be seen. Technology often falters here as well. Radios emit only static, GPS devices lose calibration, and cameras sometimes record images that seem to shimmer or bend unnaturally. The valley's reputation is reinforced by numerous disappearances. While not all can be verified, the stories persist, warning newcomers of the danger of venturing too deeply. One account tells of a pair of travelers who entered the valley seeking to map its unusual topography. Days later, only one returned, disoriented and silent. When questioned, he could not recall the companion's face or name, only fragments of a song that the wind never carried and voices that spoke in tongues foreign to him. Villagers whispered that the valley had claimed his companion, folding them into its eternal quiet, leaving only an echo behind. Even those who emerge intact often carry lasting effects. Travelers speak of an internal hush that persists long after leaving the valley, a sensitivity to sound that was never there before. Ordinary noises, traffic, conversation, even the rustle of trees can feel overwhelming or intrusive, reminders of the oppressive quiet they left behind. Dreams are often haunted by the valley, with its cliffs and still waters replaying in impossible angles, voices they cannot place whispering names they do not know. For some, this psychological imprint is a fascination, a connection to a place that defies understanding. For others, it is an inescapable reminder of the boundary between the living world and something far older, patient, and indifferent. Folklore provides a framework for understanding, or at least coping with, the valley's mysteries. Norse stories claim that those who respect the valley, offering silent homage or leaving simple tokens at its edge, can pass through without consequence, though even these travelers report feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Shamanic accounts suggest that the valley serves as a repository for lost souls, a space where memory and voice are preserved long after their origin has faded. In this interpretation, the valley does not merely silence, it listens, cataloging, and sometimes returning fragments of its collection to those who enter. Curiosity continues to draw adventurers, researchers, and paranormal enthusiasts to the valley, each hoping to witness or measure the phenomenon firsthand. Despite the warnings, the allure of encountering something so wholly alien is irresistible to some. Yet every account carries a common refrain. Silence in the valley is deliberate, alive, and patient. It does not simply exist. It observes, remembers, and interacts, subtly shaping the perception and experience of every visitor. Even skeptics admit to an unnerving awareness, a feeling that they are being watched not by eyes, but by absence itself, a presence that requires no form to assert dominance. As the valley stretches deeper into the mountains, The silence seems to grow heavier, almost tangible, pressing against the skin and bending perception. Travelers report a strange sensation, as if the air itself holds weight, thickened by memory and absence. The very act of breathing feels deliberate, almost sacrilegious, as though disturbing the stillness could awaken forces that have slumbered for centuries. Some describe feeling a presence that mirrors their own movements, always just beyond the edge of vision, vanishing when confronted directly. It is a patient awareness, indifferent yet undeniably present, as though the valley itself has consciousness and intent. Local legends suggest that the valley does not merely silence, but stores sound, memories, and emotions. Ancient tales tell of voices trapped within its walls, echoes of travelers long past, murmuring their regrets and fears into the unseen. Some say that if you walk slowly, listening closely, you might hear fragments of conversations that never occurred in the living world, whispers that feel personal, intended for you alone. Shamans and elders caution that these echoes are not benign. They carry the weight of countless souls, and to hear them is to bear a fragment of their despair. In this sense, the valley is less a physical space and more a living archive, an accumulation of life, loss, and longing preserved in the silence. The valley's reputation extends beyond folklore into modern exploration, attracting those fascinated by the unexplained. Paranormal investigators equipped with the recording devices often find their equipment behaving unpredictably. Audio tapes record only static, sometimes punctuated by indistinct whispers. Cameras capture fleeting shadows or distorted shapes that vanish upon review. Compasses spin wildly, and GPS devices lose accuracy, as if the valley rejects all attempts to quantify its nature. Even experienced hikers, skeptical and prepared, report feeling watched, a sense that the very silence is conscious, responding to intrusion with subtle cues that are impossible to define or escape. Perhaps the most chilling accounts involve those who experience the valley's silence internally, long after leaving its physical bounds. Many travelers report a lingering awareness, a residual quiet that permeates their thoughts and dreams. Ordinary noises feel intrusive or unnatural, and familiar sounds may trigger unease rather than comfort. Some claim to hear faint echoes of the valley in everyday life, whispers of voices that belong to no one they know. These psychological imprints suggest that the valley is not confined by geography alone. Its silence seems capable of reaching beyond the immediate environment, imprinting upon memory and perception in ways that defy explanation. Historical accounts reinforce the notion that the valley has long been a place of caution and reverence. Chronicles from the medieval period describe villagers leaving offerings at the valley's entrance, food, carved tokens, and whispered prayers meant to appease the spirits believed to reside within. Those who disregarded these rituals often returned with tales of voices answering their calls, shadows flitting through the mist, or a pervasive feeling of being pursued by something unseen. In these narratives, the valley serves as a liminal space, a threshold where the living and the dead intersect, and where the rules of the natural world give way to forces older and more deliberate than human understanding. Interestingly, explorers note that the valley's silence affects perception in more subtle ways as well. Time seems to stretch and compress unpredictably. A journey that should take minutes can feel like hours. Footsteps sound wrong, as though the earth itself distorts sound selectively, creating echoes that never existed and suppressing those that should. Even the simplest act of speaking becomes disorienting. Voices may fade before reaching others or return in a tone that feels alien. The mind begins to question its own senses, unsure of what is real and what is conjured by the valley's influence. This psychological effect contributes to the sense that the valley is alive, not in a corporeal sense, but as an entity that interacts with consciousness itself. Folklore often frames these experiences as lessons, warnings about hubris and curiosity. The valley is not merely dangerous in a physical sense. It challenges the mind, perception, and spirit. Those who approach it with respect and humility are said to emerge intact, albeit changed, carrying a new awareness of sound, presence, and silence. Those who disregard it may be swallowed, their voices becoming part of the archive. Echoes return to future travelers in ways that are subtle, disturbing, and unforgettable. The valley, in this sense, functions as both a guardian and a teacher, enforcing boundaries and imparting knowledge through the medium of absence. Even today, the Valley of Lost Echoes continues to draw adventurers, scholars, and those fascinated by the paranormal. They approach cautiously, aware of the stories, yet compelled by the promise of encountering something wholly alien to everyday experience. As they step into its depths, they feel the world around them fade. The rustle of trees, the distant call of a bird. Even their own voices are absorbed into the oppressive quiet. The valley listens, remembers, and sometimes responds, a patient entity shaping the perception of those who dare enter. Visitors leave with more than stories. They carry an imprint of silence itself, a reminder that some places in the world do not simply exist, but observe, and that in certain spaces the absence of sound is more alive than anything we can name. Deep within the dense jungles of Southeast Asia lies a place that seems to resist the ordinary flow of time and sound. Hidden beneath a canopy so thick that sunlight struggles to pierce it, there stands an ancient temple known to locals as the Temple of Quiet Gods. Few dare to enter, and those who do speak of an oppressive stillness that begins the moment they cross the threshold. It is not the calm of solitude, nor the peaceful hush of meditation. It is a silence that feels aware, deliberate, as if the very air is holding its breath, waiting to see what the living will do. The temple is said to have been built centuries ago to honor deities whose domain was stillness itself. Ancient texts speak of gods who ruled over silence, guardians of sacred secrets and keepers of the unseen. Monks who once inhabited the temple practiced extreme forms of quietude, moving and speaking only when absolutely necessary and believing that sound could disturb the balance between worlds. Carved statues line the stone pathways, many with mouths sealed or covered, a symbolic gesture to teach the visitor the sanctity of silence. Even the walls seem to absorb the faintest noise, creating a space where the absence of sound becomes almost tangible. Local folklore tells that those who dared to speak within the temple without permission risked more than mere reprimand. Voices are said to vanish into the stone, never to return. Travelers recount that even whispers are carried off by the air, leaving the speaker feeling hollow, stripped of the words they intended to share. Some stories go further, claiming that the temple itself would return the sound in an altered form. A distorted chant, a language unknown, or the voice of a long-dead monk speaking in tones that chilled the blood. These experiences were never reported as frightening in the conventional sense. They were unsettling, uncanny, leaving a sense of awe intertwined with the unmistakable weight of unseen observation. The architecture of the temple is designed to reinforce this unique phenomenon. Courtyards are surrounded by thick stone walls, corridors twist unpredictably, and chambers are arranged to trap echoes and redirect sound into hidden spaces. Travelers who enter the central sanctum often notice that even the smallest noise seems swallowed, dampened, until it feels as though they are the only conscious being in a vast, empty world. Footsteps, The rustle of clothing, even breathing, can feel amplified in the mind while remaining imperceptible outside. Some explorers report a sensation that their own thoughts are being observed, mirrored by the oppressive quiet, each unspoken fear or doubt reflected back at them in a way that defies logic. The surrounding jungle, too, appears to respect the temple's domain. Birds avoid the immediate area, insects are strangely absent, and the wind slows to a near standstill, brushing lightly through the trees as if treading carefully. Even rivers and streams nearby seem muted, their waters flowing without the familiar gurgle or rush one expects. Local legends claim that this is no coincidence, that the temple exerts a subtle influence over the natural world, enforcing a rule of silence that extends beyond its walls. Animals that wander too close reportedly act unnaturally, pausing mid-step, ears alert to a sound that does not exist, before retreating quickly into the forest. Many who have ventured into the temple speak of an almost hypnotic quality to the stillness. Time feels altered. Minutes can stretch into hours, and the mind struggles to maintain focus amid the overwhelming quiet. Some report hearing soft murmurs that seem to rise from the very walls, indistinct and fleeting, like the rustle of silk or the distant chanting of monks long gone. Others describe a sense of connection, as though the silence is not a void but a bridge, linking the visitor to realms unseen. It is a quiet that demands attention, teaching through absence, shaping perception in ways that ordinary sound never could. Paranormal investigators who have studied the temple note that modern recording equipment often fails to capture its unique acoustic properties. Microphones record faint static or nothing at all, while cameras may capture shadows that seem to flicker independently of light. Compasses spin, and electronic devices lose calibration, reinforcing the impression that the temple exists partially outside the laws of the known world. Even those who enter with skepticism find themselves unsettled, sensing a presence that does not require form, a consciousness expressed purely through absence. Historical accounts add to the mystery. Ancient texts describe rituals in which offerings of food, incense, and carved tokens were left at thresholds or at the feet of statues. Monks performed intricate ceremonies in complete silence, believing that any sound could disrupt the delicate balance maintained within the temple. Legends insist that these offerings were not merely symbolic, they were necessary to keep restless spirits contained and to maintain the favor of the quiet gods. Those who ignored such practices risked more than superstition. Some records speak of individuals who vanished entirely, absorbed into the temple's silence, leaving only whispers behind. Even today, travelers report that spending time in the temple leaves an indelible mark on perception. Ordinary sounds outside, footsteps, conversation, the wind in trees, can feel intrusive or jarring, a reminder of the oppressive stillness experienced within. Some describe vivid dreams in which the temple returns, corridors twisting impossibly, statues moving imperceptibly, and a quiet that presses in on all sides. The effect is lasting, as though the temple imparts a sensitivity to sound and presence that remains long after leaving its boundaries. Visitors who have explored the temple of quiet gods often speak of subtle distortions in perception. Hallways seem longer than they should be. Corridors bend at impossible angles, and rooms appear larger or smaller depending on the observer's focus. The temple does not just silence sound. It seems to manipulate the senses themselves. Travelers report feeling watched from angles they cannot see, or that shadows shift independently, responding to movement without source. It is as if the temple, or whatever presides within it, is alive, studying each intruder, cataloging behavior, and responding in ways that defy ordinary understanding. The surrounding forest seems to amplify this effect. Those approaching the temple note that the familiar noises of life, the call of birds, rustling of leaves, even the distant chatter of insects, fade as they near its gates. It is an eerie transition, a sensation that the natural world is yielding to a higher, quieter order. Some explorers claim that when they pause at the temple's threshold, they can sense the presence of countless others who have entered before them. Monks, pilgrims, and perhaps travelers who never returned. The air carries the weight of these absent voices, not in sound, but in an almost tactile stillness that presses against the skin and mind. Folklore offers chilling explanations for this phenomenon. Legends say that the quiet gods demand respect for stillness, and those who speak unnecessarily or act without intention may provoke consequences that transcend the physical. Stories recount travelers who laughed, shouted, or even whispered as they explored the temple, only to find their voices swallowed instantly, leaving them silent for hours or days. Some claim that these lost words become part of the temple's consciousness, stored like precious offerings in a vault of invisible sound. The silence is thus both a boundary and a memory, a living record of human intrusion and divine expectation. Accounts from modern explorers echo these ancient warnings. Paranormal investigators describe entering the central sanctum and feeling a pressure that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. Whispers of unknown origin sometimes rise and fade in the corners of the mind, just beyond perception. Cameras occasionally capture shadows or figures that are not physically present, moving with unnatural fluidity. Even electronic devices fail to function normally, as if the temple actively resists attempts to measure or quantify its presence. These consistent phenomena reinforce the idea that the temple exists at the intersection of the natural and supernatural, a place where ordinary rules no longer fully apply. Historical records hint at the temple's purpose beyond mere worship. It was not simply a place to honor silent gods, but also a center for training, perception, and awareness. Monks practiced extreme forms of meditation and movement in silence, learning to sense presence and intent without relying on sound. They believed that the quiet was a bridge to the unseen, enabling communion with spirits, ancestors, or other entities that exist just beyond human perception. In this sense, silence was not absence, but a medium, a conduit for understanding that could only be accessed through discipline, reverence, and respect. Even small details of the temple suggest a deliberate design to cultivate this experience. Stone floors are uneven, and corridors narrow unexpectedly, creating a heightened sense of awareness with each step. Chambers are adorned with carvings of figures with covered mouths and inscriptions warn of the consequences of disturbing the sacred quiet. Courtyards are arranged so that echoes are trapped or muted entirely, forcing visitors to confront their own presence and movements. The architecture itself becomes a teacher, shaping perception and interaction, and forcing the primacy of silence as both tool and test. Accounts of the temple's more unsettling phenomena continue into modern times. Explorers report hearing indistinct chants at night when alone, though no living monk has been present for centuries. Others speak of faint touches on the shoulder or hair, a subtle pressure in the air that cannot be explained by wind or wildlife. Some even claim to see statues shift slightly when not observed directly, as if the temple itself is breathing, subtly interacting with those within. The effects are not always immediate. Travelers often report that the quiet imprints itself on the mind, returning in dreams or in moments of reflection long after leaving. The temple's influence extends beyond those who enter its walls. Villagers in nearby settlements describe an uncanny hush surrounding the temple grounds, where animals avoid certain paths and winds fail to stir leaves. Travelers passing nearby feel the weight of stillness even without setting foot inside. It is as if the temple projects its dominion outward, creating a buffer of quiet that warns, protects, and perhaps even teaches those who approach. Some believe this is intentional, a safeguard to ensure that only those prepared for its lessons may enter fully. The most remarkable experiences reported by visitors occur in the temple's central sanctum, a vast chamber open to the sky, yet surrounded by impossibly thick walls that trap sound and light in unusual ways. Those who enter describe a sensation of weightlessness, not in body, but in perception. Footsteps do not carry as expected. Voices seem distant even when whispered, and the air feels charged with an invisible awareness. Some explorers speak of the sensation that the temple itself is breathing, inhaling and exhaling in time with their heartbeats, as if the very stones possess consciousness. It is an experience that defies rational explanation, one that is remembered long after leaving the temple grounds. Folklore often frames these experiences as tests of humility. Ancient texts warn that silence is a sacred language, one that humans rarely understand. Those who enter with arrogance or curiosity without respect may find themselves disoriented, their senses twisted, or worse, their memories of the temple altered in ways they cannot reconcile. Legends tell of travelers who emerged hours later claiming days had passed, or who could no longer recall their own voices, feeling as though the temple had absorbed part of them, leaving only an echo behind. In these stories, the temple does not punish in the conventional sense. It teaches, subtly reshaping perception to reveal that the absence of sound can be as potent as its presence. Some accounts suggest that the temple acts as a repository for memory, absorbing fragments of those who pass through it. Whispers, gestures, and even emotions are preserved in ways invisible to the eye, yet profoundly felt by subsequent visitors. Paranormal investigators have recorded unusual acoustic anomalies, faint murmurs that seem to respond to thought, shadows that appear to move with intent, and inexplicable static that coincides with unspoken words. These phenomena suggest that the temple interacts with consciousness directly, blurring the line between external and internal experience. Visitors often leave with an acute awareness of sound and stillness, their perceptions sharpened or permanently altered. Historical records reinforce the temple's role as a place of both spiritual and psychological significance. Monks trained extensively in the art of silence, using it as a tool to commune with unseen forces, meditate on impermanence, and understand the boundaries between the living and the dead. Rituals were precise, and any deviation was believed to disturb the delicate balance maintained by the quiet gods. Offerings were left not merely as homage, but as a means to maintain harmony with the unseen inhabitants of the temple, ensuring that silence remained an active, protective presence rather than a passive void. Modern explorers describe the temple as a space that defies conventional measurement. Audio equipment often fails or records only faint distortions. Cameras capture shadows that do not align with light sources, and compasses may spin without reason. Even the most skeptical visitors report an uncanny awareness of being observed by a presence that requires no physical form. Some describe subtle touches on clothing or skin, faint pressures that vanish when examined, and a persistent sense of expectation, as though the temple is evaluating every movement and decision. These reports align with centuries of folklore, reinforcing the notion that the temple's quiet is not accidental but deliberate, intentional, and sentient. Interestingly, the temple also appears to influence the natural environment around it. Birds avoid the immediate area, insects vanish, and even the wind slows to a whisper, as though respecting the sanctity of the grounds. Travelers who pause at the threshold often feel an almost tactile stillness radiating outward, a warning or invitation, depending on their intentions. Animals that wander near may freeze or retreat inexplicably, reinforcing the idea that the temple's influence extends beyond the stone walls, shaping the surrounding landscape and commanding respect from both living creatures and human visitors. Psychologically, the temple's silence exerts profound effects. Visitors often report heightened awareness, a sensitivity to sound that persists long after leaving. Ordinary noises can feel intrusive or jarring, while subtle tones are amplified in perception. Dreams frequently revisit the temple, with corridors twisting impossibly, statues moving slightly when unobserved, and the pervasive silence pressing inward. Some describe the experience as transformative, a lesson in humility and attentiveness imparted by the quiet itself. Others find the experience unsettling, as if the temple has left part of its consciousness within them, an imprint that cannot be removed. Ultimately, the Temple of Quiet Gods embodies the paradox of silence, absence and presence intertwined, stillness as potent as sound, teaching through omission rather than articulation. It is a place where perception, memory, and consciousness are reshaped, where the weight of unspoken words and unseen observers is felt more keenly than any tangible object. Visitors leave changed, carrying with them a sensitivity to both noise and absence, and a lingering awareness that in certain sacred spaces, silence is alive, deliberate, and infinitely patient. The temple stands as a reminder that not all power is loud, not all presence visible, and that the quietest places may hold the most profound truths, waiting for those brave enough to listen. Some of the most unsettling stories about the Temple of Quiet Gods come from those who have lingered too long within its walls. Travelers report a sense of being absorbed by the silence itself, as if their very thoughts and memories are being cataloged and reshaped. One account tells of an explorer who entered the temple intending to meditate for only a few hours, but emerged several days later with no recollection of time passing. He spoke of voices that seemed to answer his internal questions, murmurs that anticipated his thoughts, and shadows that mirrored his movements with eerie precision. Though unharmed physically, he described an internal unease that lingered for months, a constant reminder that the silence of the temple does not end when one leaves. Another tale speaks of a pair of researchers who entered together and attempted to speak quietly while exploring the central sanctum. They found their words swallowed almost instantly, replaced by faint murmurs they could not recognize. Shadows shifted around them, and a pressure seemed to press down on their shoulders, subtle but unmistakable. By the time they exited, both were pale, shaken, and unnaturally quiet, their voices subdued for days. Their journals describe a profound sensation that the temple itself was aware of them, reading intent, and responding in ways that were not malicious, but deeply perceptive. The silence was not empty. It was alive, patient, and endlessly observant. Local villagers often reinforce the sense of reverence the temple commands. Even today, many avoid the grounds entirely, leaving offerings at the perimeter rather than stepping inside. Some claim that the temple has a protective influence, safeguarding the surrounding region by drawing in those who seek understanding while warning away the careless. Stories describe travelers who ignored these warnings only to return altered, more introspective, haunted by voices they cannot place, or with an uneasy sensitivity to ordinary sounds that had previously gone unnoticed. In these narratives, the temple serves as both guardian and teacher, guiding those who approach with respect while reshaping the perception of those who trespass. The natural environment around the temple contributes to its otherworldly effect. Trees grow densely, creating a canopy that filters sunlight into ghostly shafts, while moss-covered stones seem to absorb not only sound, but movement. Streams that run nearby are often silent, their waters flowing with barely perceptible motion. Wildlife skirts the area, avoiding its boundaries. Some visitors describe hearing faint echoes of the temple even beyond its walls, a whisper, a rustle, or a subtle vibration that seems to originate from nowhere, a lingering reminder that the temple's influence does not end at its stone perimeter. Modern studies have tried to capture these phenomena scientifically, yet the temple continues to defy explanation. Audio recordings often pick up static or ghostly tones. Cameras capture shadows that move independently of light sources, and compasses may spin erratically. Electronic devices fail without apparent cause, leaving investigators to rely on subjective accounts to piece together the experience. Even skeptics describe a sense of unease, an awareness of being observed in a space that refuses to be fully measured or understood. It is a place where human perception is challenged, reshaped, and ultimately humbled. Some legends hint at the temple's function as a bridge between worlds. The quiet gods, it is said, are guardians of thresholds, and their domain allows glimpses of realms that exist beyond the living. Visitors who approach with reverence may feel a connection to spirits, ancestors, or entities that do not exist in ordinary perception. Those who enter carelessly risk being caught in the liminal space, absorbed into the silence, their presence becoming part of the temple's enduring consciousness. In this way, the temple is not simply a structure. It is a participant in an ongoing dialogue between the living and the unseen, mediated entirely through stillness. Perhaps the most profound lesson of the Temple of Quiet Gods is the power of absence. Sound, like light, can guide, inform, and communicate, yet silence can do the same in ways subtler, deeper, and far more persistent. Visitors often emerge transformed, carrying a heightened awareness of sound, presence, and perception. Ordinary noises may seem intrusive, faint tones amplified, and the mind may replay the quiet of the temple in dreams or moments of reflection. For some, the experience is spiritual, for others deeply unsettling, but for all, the imprint of the silence is undeniable. Ultimately, the Temple of Quiet Gods stands as a testament to the power of stillness, a place where absence is alive, deliberate, and endlessly observant. It reminds us that the world is not measured solely by what we hear or see, but also by what is withheld, by what listens while we speak, and by the spaces that demand respect and awareness. Those who enter learn that silence is not merely empty. It is a force, a presence, and a teacher. And in the shadows of the temple, it whispers lessons that no words can convey, echoing in memory and perception, long after the threshold has been crossed. Welcome to a place where the sand stretches endlessly beneath a sun that seems both cruel and indifferent, a desert unlike any other. Known to locals as the Desert of the Mute Wind, it is a landscape that defies expectation. Travelers report that despite the vast openness, the wind, the element that defines deserts, is absent. Sand dunes remain eerily still, their crests unshaken by currents, and the usual whispers of shifting grains are muted as though the earth itself refuses to breathe. The desert is alive, but its life is silent, deliberate, and unnervingly patient. Legends surrounding this desert date back centuries. Bedouin tribes speak of the wind as a spirit, a force that carries life, sound, and news across the sands. In this particular region, it is said that a curse or an ancient pact silenced the wind, leaving the desert in perpetual stillness. Travelers who venture too far into its depths often return with tales of disorientation and subtle fear. The absence of movement, combined with the relentless sun, seems to warp perception, making time stretch and contract in ways that unsettle the mind. Some say that the desert does not merely silence the wind. It listens to all who enter, weighing intent and reflecting it back as an oppressive stillness that presses on the senses. Accounts from explorers suggest that the desert has a way of amplifying isolation. The horizon seems impossibly distant, yet nearby dunes can appear to shift or tilt unexpectedly, creating a sensation that the landscape is alive, responsive, and deliberate. Travelers report that ordinary sounds, footsteps in sand, the brush of clothing, vanish almost instantly. Shouts are swallowed without echo, leaving the human voice stranded in the mind rather than the air. This creates a profound unease, as if the desert itself is a conscious entity, aware of intrusion and capable of erasing presence from perception. Some stories suggest that the desert has absorbed echoes from centuries of travelers, nomads, and lost souls. Whispers of previous journeys linger just beneath awareness, surfacing in fleeting thoughts or sudden sensations. Explorers often describe hearing faint murmurs when the mind is quiet, subtle enough that it could be imagination, yet unmistakable in their effect. The desert's silence is not empty. It is layered, an accumulation of memory, emotion, and intent, waiting for the perceptive to sense its presence. In these accounts, the mute wind is both protector and predator, offering clarity to those who respect it, while disorienting those who trespass heedlessly. Local folklore includes warnings that the desert tests the will of those who enter. A traveler may feel compelled to call out, to break the oppressive silence. Yet any sound is fleeting, returning only as an echo within the mind, not the world. Some legends speak of travelers who attempted to navigate the sands using sound alone, only to find themselves lost, disoriented, or carried further from safety by hallucinations created in the absence of external reference. The desert's silence becomes a lens through which the human mind is magnified, revealing fear, impatience, and the weight of unacknowledged thought. The geography of the desert contributes to its uncanny stillness. High dunes form natural walls that trap sound and shade, creating areas where even the faintest whispers are absorbed or redirected invisibly. Salt flats and rocky expanses provide no echo, and dry riverbeds act as natural amplifiers of the silence, deepening the impression of absence. Animals avoid the desert entirely. Birds circle its edges without entering, and traces of wildlife within are scarce, contributing to the feeling that the land itself is inhospitable, not only physically but psychically. Even heat and light seem distorted, shifting the perception of distance and form in subtle ways that confuse the senses. Reports from modern explorers echo centuries-old legends. Instruments often fail to capture the peculiar acoustic properties of the desert. Sound meters register near zero. Microphones record only faint static, and cameras occasionally capture distortions in the air itself, as if heat and absence of sound conspire to warp perception. Those who venture too far sometimes experience vertigo, not from terrain, but from the mind's attempt to reconcile sensory absence. The desert magnifies consciousness while diminishing ordinary reference points, creating a profound vulnerability to both fear and awe. Psychologically, the desert's effect is subtle but pervasive. Time loses its usual meaning. Footsteps feel unnaturally light, and even breathing can seem amplified in isolation. Explorers speak of dreams afterward, in which the desert returns, a vast expanse of stillness pressing against the mind. Some report a lingering sensitivity to wind and sound in ordinary life, an awareness born from prolonged exposure to the desert's mute condition. The silence leaves a mark, not just on memory, but on perception itself, reminding those who encounter it that stillness can be as powerful, deliberate, and alive as any storm. The desert of the mute wind has long inspired awe and fear, and local legends speak of it as a place where the boundaries between life and something older, stranger, begin to blur. Travelers recount the sensation of being watched by invisible eyes, of sand shifting in patterns that feel deliberate, almost sentient. Even in the absence of wind, fine grains appear to ripple as if guided by some unseen hand, forming shapes that vanish when approached. Some explorers claim to have seen mirages that were more than illusions, ghostly figures walking across dunes in silence, only to dissolve when observed directly. Many tales describe the desert as a test of resolve. One story tells of a caravan that became lost while crossing its heart, hoping to navigate using the sun and distant landmarks. As they progressed, the landscape seemed to resist their perception. Dunes appeared to move, flat plains seemed to elongate endlessly, and any sound they attempted to make vanished instantly. After days without wind or sign of life, they emerged on the far edge. Some changed in temperament, others unusually silent, as though the desert had claimed not their bodies, but the essence of their voices. They spoke afterward of a strange presence accompanying them, a consciousness without form, guiding or observing in ways impossible to define. Some explorers suggest that the desert acts as a memory keeper, much like the valley or temple. Every step taken, every word attempted, is absorbed into its stillness. Visitors often report hearing echoes of their own thoughts, distorted and returned at odd intervals. The desert seems to store not just sound, but intention and emotion, reflecting them subtly back to intruders. Some claim to feel whispers of travelers who came centuries before, carried in the absence of wind, a subtle layering of past and present that blurs the distinction between observer and observed. It is a quiet that is not passive. It is layered, deliberate, and alive. Animals that approach the desert's heart behave strangely. Camels, usually hardy and accustomed to silence, may pause mid-step, ears twitching at sounds that do not exist, before retreating. Birds circle the outer dunes but never land, and small creatures leave no tracks within the central sands. Some local legends suggest that the mute wind is a barrier, protecting the desert from intrusion, or perhaps a marker of sacred ground. The absence of ordinary sound is a warning and a measure, a force field that compels respect for the power that resides here. The desert also has an uncanny effect on human perception of time and space. Journeys that should take hours feel interminable, and distances appear distorted. Travelers speak of walking in a straight line, only to find that landmarks have shifted, or that dunes have grown taller, creating the sensation of an ever-expanding labyrinth. This disorientation is compounded by the silence. Without the cues provided by wind or animal life, the mind struggles to anchor itself. Many report feeling that the desert is observing their reactions, noting hesitation, fear, and curiosity, and subtly altering the environment in response. Historical accounts suggest that the desert may have held spiritual significance long before modern exploration. Ancient tribes believed that the mute wind was the manifestation of a powerful, unseen entity, an invisible god or guardian of the sands. Rituals included leaving offerings at specific points and chanting prayers at the desert's edge, acknowledging its presence and seeking safe passage. Ignoring these practices, according to legend, could result in prolonged disorientation, sudden storms, or even disappearance. Travelers who respected these rituals often returned with stories of clarity and insight, as if the desert had imparted a subtle knowledge through the medium of stillness. Modern adventurers continue to be drawn to the desert despite, or perhaps because of, its silence. Researchers equipped with instruments find that recordings often fail to capture anything beyond faint static or distorted sound. GPS units may malfunction, compasses spin erratically, and the landscape itself seems resistant to mapping. Many describe a creeping awareness, the sense that the desert is not merely an empty space, but a presence, watching, listening, and responding. Even brief exposure can leave a lasting imprint, heightening sensitivity to sound, movement, and the nuances of human perception. Explorers who linger in the heart of the desert of the mute wind often speak of an almost tangible awareness that seems to move through the sands. It is not a presence in the conventional sense, but something subtler, a consciousness expressed entirely through absence. Footsteps vanish without trace, shouts are swallowed instantly, and even the act of thinking aloud feels intrusive. Some travelers report glimpsing shifting shadows that mimic their movements, only to find nothing when they turn to observe. The desert, in its profound silence, seems to study those who enter, weighing intent and subtly guiding or discouraging their actions. The desert's silence affects perception in more ways than one. Heat haze dances across the dunes, creating illusory ripples in space. Yet in this place, the stillness magnifies their eeriness. Distant landmarks appear and vanish unpredictably, and the mind struggles to gauge distance or orientation. Travelers often describe a sense of vertigo, not caused by terrain, but by the relentless quiet pressing upon the senses. Without wind or wildlife as reference points, the brain searches for patterns that may not exist, and in doing so becomes hyper-aware of its own thoughts. The desert is a mirror, reflecting fear, curiosity, and resolve back to the visitor, amplifying both insight and anxiety. Local folklore is rich with tales of those who became part of the desert itself. One story recounts a trader who ventured too deeply during a heatless dawn, ignoring the warnings of elders. Days later, he emerged at the edge of the sands, silent and pale, unable to remember why he had entered or what he had witnessed. Some say he carried fragments of other travelers' voices in his mind, echoes from centuries past preserved in the desert's mute stillness. Scholars suggest that these stories serve as cautionary tales, emphasizing respect for a place that is not only physically inhospitable, but psychically alive. The desert also appears to act as a kind of acoustic archive. Those who concentrate, listen deeply, or meditate report faint murmurs that seem to carry from no discernible source. Some of these sounds resemble words, others abstract tones that cannot be recognized. Investigators have recorded low-frequency vibrations that seem synchronized with the footsteps or thoughts of intruders. These subtle phenomena suggest that the desert does more than silence. It absorbs, transforms, and perhaps even communicates through the medium of absence. The mute wind is not emptiness. It is a repository, attentive and deliberate. Encounters with wildlife reinforce this perception. Few animals venture into the desert's heart. Camels and goats may halt mid-step, ears alert to non-existent sounds, while birds circle the periphery without landing. Insects vanish completely. Those who walk among the dunes often notice minute shifts in sand patterns, as if invisible hands or currents are moving beneath the surface. These small, almost imperceptible changes enhance the sense that the desert is an active participant in its own preservation, a silent intelligence interacting with the living while remaining invisible and untouchable. Modern adventurers have also noted the desert's effect on memory. Travelers sometimes emerge confused about the passage of time, with hours or days seeming to merge into one another. Maps and compasses fail, and attempts to record the experience often produce results that differ dramatically from observation. Photos may capture warped horizons or faint shadows that have no identifiable source. while sound recordings reveal static or distorted murmurs. Even those familiar with desert landscapes find themselves disoriented, as though the mute wind resists human measurement and imposes its own logic upon perception. Psychologically, the desert leaves lasting impressions. Many report heightened sensitivity to ordinary sounds after spending time within or near its borders. Conversations may seem jarring, minor movements startling, and the natural world elsewhere feels louder and more intrusive than before. Dreams often revisit the desert, with dunes shifting impossibly and the mute wind pressing down in ways that defy explanation. Some describe a lingering awareness, a faint echo of the desert's consciousness, reminding them that stillness can be as potent, deliberate, and alive as any storm. The most profound experiences in the desert of the mute wind occur when travelers venture into the deepest stretches, where the silence becomes almost tangible. In these regions, footsteps feel lighter than expected, even weightless, as though the desert itself is cushioning or absorbing movement. Shouts and cries vanish instantly, leaving the mind acutely aware of its own thoughts. Many describe a sensation of being accompanied by a presence that is neither threatening nor comforting, but patient, deliberate, and observant. The desert seems to recognize intent, responding not with visible action, but with an invisible, almost psychic awareness that follows every movement. Ancient legends suggest that the desert's stillness was not always this profound. Oral histories speak of a time when wind and sound flowed freely across the sands, until an event, known only in myth, imposed a curse or awakened a guardian spirit. Some tales describe a deity of silence, angered by human arrogance, halting the wind and absorbing all sound into the sands, as a lesson in humility. Others speak of a catastrophic battle, the echoes of which were trapped forever, leaving the desert to preserve a history of voices, cries, and secrets. In these stories, the absence of wind and sound is a living memory, a reminder that actions and words, once released, are not always free to vanish. Encounters with the desert are not limited to sensory absence. Many travelers report seeing fleeting shapes on the horizon, figures that appear to move against logic, or shadows that stretch impossibly long before vanishing entirely. Some claim to feel brushes against their skin, fleeting touches that do not correspond to wind or other physical causes. These subtle phenomena suggest the desert has a consciousness of its own, a quiet awareness that interacts with those who enter, sometimes playful, sometimes testing, but always deliberate. Even the most skeptical explorers describe a sense of being watched, measured, and evaluated in ways that cannot be quantified. The desert's psychological effects extend beyond disorientation. Travelers often report an acute awareness of the smallest sounds in the outside world after exposure, their perception sharpened, yet unsettled. Ordinary noises, footsteps, birdsong, conversations can feel amplified or intrusive, as if the mind has become attuned to a level of subtlety rarely experienced in everyday life. Some recount vivid dreams in which the desert returns, dunes shifting endlessly, shadows moving independently, and a silence that presses in on thought, memory, and imagination alike. The experience is transformative, leaving many with an enduring sense of both awe and unease. Local communities continue to honor the desert's power through ritual and respect. Offerings are left at the edges of the dunes, small tokens, prayers, or whispered words to acknowledge the presence that rules the sands. Those who ignore these customs are said to risk prolonged disorientation, hallucinations, or even disappearance. Travelers who heed these traditions often report experiences of clarity, insight, and a profound understanding of the desert's subtle intelligence. In this way, the mute wind is not merely a natural phenomenon, but a teacher and guardian, enforcing respect and awareness through the medium of silence. Scientific attempts to measure or explain the desert often fall short. Instruments fail, compasses spin unpredictably, and GPS devices lose calibration in the heart of the dunes. Sound meters register near zero, while audio recordings capture only faint static or anomalous tones. Even video footage may reveal shadows or distortions that defy ordinary physics. These anomalies suggest that the desert is not a passive landscape, but an active, conscious environment, interacting with human perception in ways that challenge conventional understanding. The desert of the mute wind embodies a paradox: vast openness, yet oppressive awareness, stillness yet profound vitality. It is a place where absence is as powerful as presence, where silence teaches, observes, and transforms. Travelers leave not only with stories of invisible currents and disorienting sands, but with an enduring sensitivity to sound, movement, and the unseen forces that shape our world. The desert lingers in memory long after departure, a reminder that silence is not empty, and that some places in the world are alive in ways we may never fully comprehend. Ultimately, the desert teaches that stillness is an active force, a guardian of boundaries, a vessel for memory, and a mirror for human perception. It reminds us that the absence of sound is not the absence of life, that silence carries intention, history, and consciousness, and that those who enter with respect may emerge with profound insight, while those who enter heedlessly may find themselves lost in more than just space. The desert of the mute wind is a living testament to the unseen, a realm where silence is not merely quiet, but alive, deliberate, and infinitely patient, whispering lessons that endure long after the dunes have been left behind. Welcome to a space where silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a presence that seems to breathe, think, and observe. Across the world, from the valleys that swallow voices to the deserts where the wind dares not move, there are places where stillness behaves as though it is alive. In these locations, silence is not passive. It interacts with the living, shaping perception, testing resolve, and leaving an indelible mark on the psyche. Today, we explore the theories that attempt to explain this phenomenon, how absence can carry life, memory, and even intention. One of the oldest theories suggests that living silence is the echo of spiritual energy. Ancient cultures often described certain areas as sacred or cursed, where the boundaries between worlds were thin. The absence of ordinary sound was interpreted not as emptiness, but as the presence of unseen entities, spirits, or forces that demanded respect. In some traditions, these silent zones were thought to contain concentrated consciousness, residual thoughts, prayers, or emotions so potent that they could dampen ordinary sound and manipulate perception. Travelers entering these spaces often report an awareness that the silence is observing them, waiting to measure intention and react accordingly. Modern researchers, both scientific and paranormal, offer another perspective, that these areas are repositories of memory and energy. The concept is that environments, especially those touched by strong human emotion or repeated rituals, can retain echoes of past events. Over time, these echoes accumulate, creating a kind of cognitive field that responds to human presence. In essence, the silence is alive because it carries layers of memory and intention. Those who enter may perceive subtle shifts, shadows moving oddly, whispers just beyond comprehension, or the feeling of being watched, because the space itself is a living record, actively interacting with consciousness rather than remaining inert. Some theorists propose that living silence has a neurological effect. Our brains rely on sound as a measure of space, time, and presence. When sound is removed or seemingly removed, our senses are forced to compensate. This hyper-awareness can create the illusion that silence is sentient. Every movement, every breath, every intention becomes magnified, and the brain fills the void with subtle interpretations, shadows that seem to shift, whispers that seem to respond, and a pervasive sense of observation. In essence, the silence interacts with the mind directly, shaping experience so that it feels alive, even if no supernatural force is present. Yet another explanation comes from physics. Certain locations exhibit unusual acoustic properties. Natural materials absorb and redirect sound in ways that make ordinary noises vanish or echo unpredictably. Caverns, dense forests, deserts, and ancient stone structures may create zones where sound is distorted, dampened, or trapped. In some cases, this creates the sensation of a living environment, because the silence reacts to movement in unpredictable ways. Modern audio measurements often fail to capture what human senses perceive, reinforcing the idea that silence in these spaces is more than passive. It has a dynamic, interactive quality. Psychologists also suggest that our perception of living silence is tied to emotional and cultural conditioning. Humans are attuned to sound as a measure of life and safety. When familiar auditory cues vanish, the mind instinctively searches for patterns, agency, or intent. In haunted or sacred spaces, this heightened awareness can manifest as the impression that silence itself is watching, thinking, or guiding. In this sense, the phenomenon is both environmental and psychological, a partnership between external conditions and the brain's innate responsiveness to absence. Many folklorists argue that silence is a universal symbol, carrying meaning far beyond what is immediately perceptible. Cultures worldwide associate silence with reverence, danger, or power. In sacred temples, deep forests, remote valleys, and deserts where wind refuses to blow, silence communicates lessons about respect, mortality, and the unseen. It acts as a mirror, reflecting inner fears, curiosity, and intention. Those who enter heedlessly may find themselves lost or disoriented, while those who approach with reverence often report insight, clarity, or a profound connection to the unseen forces that inhabit the world. Living silence may also be seen as an ecosystem of consciousness. In some theories, the environment itself contains layers of awareness, residual thought, memory, or emotion that interact with intruders. These zones can amplify perception, reshape experience, and leave a lasting imprint on memory. The silence is thus not empty but populated by the echoes of countless presences, both living and departed. To enter such a space is to participate in a dialogue with forces that do not communicate through sound, but through perception, intuition, and subtle energy. Stories from across the globe give credence to these theories. In remote mountain valleys, travelers report entire ecosystems rendered silent, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Birds refuse to sing, insects cease their calls, and even the wind seems to halt. Those who enter speak of a pressure that is not physical but mental, a pervasive awareness that surrounds and watches. Many report that footsteps do not echo as expected, that whispered words vanish instantly, and that a sense of presence, unseen yet unmistakable, permeates the air. These experiences suggest that silence is not merely the absence of sound, but an active agent shaping perception and reality. In ancient temples and sacred groves, the phenomenon of living silence is often interpreted as deliberate. Rituals and meditative practices frequently involve long periods of quiet, intended to heighten sensitivity and awareness. Silence, in this context, is both a tool and a test. Those who enter unprepared may feel disoriented, anxious, or disconnected from reality, while those who approach with intention experience clarity, insight, and even a sense of communion with forces beyond ordinary perception. Folklore often warns that disrespecting silence, by shouting, laughing, or acting recklessly, invites consequences that range from minor disorientation to profound psychological effects. The concept of living silence extends into the natural world. Scientists studying remote deserts, deep forests, and isolated caves have noted that areas with extreme acoustic dampening can produce effects remarkably similar to those reported in legends. Sound is absorbed, diffused, or trapped in ways that make ordinary perception unreliable. The brain, deprived of expected auditory cues, heightens other senses, creating a sense of presence or awareness that can feel almost sentient. Explorers often report fleeting shapes, shifting shadows, or subtle pressure in the air, phenomena that may be interpreted as living silence, interacting with consciousness. Psychological studies suggest another layer to the experience. Humans rely on sound as a measure of safety and orientation. In the absence of expected cues, the brain generates patterns, projecting meaning where none may exist. This process can explain why travelers perceive silence as alive, but it does not diminish the intensity of the experience. Whether through heightened awareness, environmental factors, or lingering echoes of energy, the silence becomes immersive, almost tangible, affecting perception and leaving a lasting impression. Some describe dreams in which the silence returns, stretching across familiar landscapes and pressing in on thought, a subtle reminder that absence can carry as much weight as presence. Living silence may also interact with memory. Ancient beliefs and modern anecdotal reports alike suggest that areas of profound quiet can store fragments of emotion, thought, and experience. In remote valleys, deserted temples, and muted deserts, the stillness is layered, containing echoes of the countless presences that have passed through. Travelers who linger may perceive these layers in fleeting whispers, shifting shadows, or intuitive impressions. The silence is thus a repository, a living archive that interacts with perception, recording history without words or sound, leaving traces in memory and consciousness that endure long after departure. Some theorists propose that living silence is an emergent property of consciousness and environment combined. When a place has been touched by extreme emotion, ritual, or repeated human presence, it accumulates subtle patterns of energy that respond to those who enter. Silence is not accidental in these locations. It is a byproduct of accumulated intention, creating a zone where perception itself is active, dynamic, and responsive. Intruders may feel observed, tested, or subtly guided, while those who respect the quiet find clarity and insight. In this view, silence becomes a medium of interaction, bridging the external world and the observer's consciousness. The phenomenon also suggests a lesson in humility. Humans are accustomed to dominating sound, filling spaces with noise to assert presence or control. In zones of living silence, this instinct is disrupted. Attempts to impose sound are met with immediate absence or subtle distortion, reminding travelers that the environment operates on a different set of rules. Respect becomes essential. Those who enter lightly, observing and listening, often emerge transformed, their awareness of sound, perception, and the unseen sharpened in ways that persist far beyond the physical space. Many travelers describe living silence as a presence that is simultaneously gentle and commanding. It does not force, push, or pull, yet it alters perception subtly, reshaping awareness without visible intervention. Some speak of standing in a quiet valley or temple and feeling a weight, not of stone or earth, but of consciousness itself. Thoughts seem magnified, intentions amplified, and even minor movements feel observed. The effect is profound. One begins to sense that the silence is not just an absence, but a form of attention, a deliberate awareness that responds to the smallest intrusion or gesture. The desert, the temple, and the valley each exemplify this phenomenon in different ways. In deserts, the mute wind strips away external cues, heightening internal awareness. In temples, silence is cultivated deliberately, guiding meditation and spiritual insight. In valleys where voices are swallowed, the environment seems to reclaim sound, leaving travelers with the impression that even the air itself remembers and judges. Across all these locations, the common thread is that the silence is not inert. It interacts with human perception, shaping experience and memory. Some theorists call it conscious absence, a force that exists not as sound or motion, but as attentive stillness. A number of reports also hint at the relational quality of living silence. Visitors often feel as if the environment responds to their presence, subtly amplifying emotions, reflecting fear or calm, and even anticipating action. Those who enter in panic may feel the silence tightening, pressing in on thought and sensation, whereas those who enter with reverence often feel guided or observed with gentle patience. This has led some folklorists and paranormal theorists to suggest that living silence operates on a feedback loop. Perception affects environment, and the environment, in turn, shapes perception. In this way, silence is not merely experienced. It is a participant, a silent companion in the unfolding of consciousness. Scientific studies, though limited, offer intriguing possibilities. Acoustic anomalies, electromagnetic fluctuations, and subtle gravitational variations have been recorded in locations associated with profound silence. While these measurements do not explain the entirety of the phenomenon, they suggest that certain environments may naturally amplify perception and responsiveness. When combined with folklore and human experience, it becomes apparent that living silence may be both a natural and mystical phenomenon, blending environmental, psychological, and spiritual dimensions in ways that challenge ordinary understanding. Some philosophers propose a symbolic interpretation. Silence, they argue, represents the unseen structures of reality. Just as absence in music creates rhythm and meaning, absence in the environment emphasizes presence and awareness. In haunted valleys, muted deserts, and sacred temples, the absence of sound becomes a lens, focusing attention on subtle shifts, hidden forms, and the interplay of perception and space. It is a reminder that what is unspoken, unseen, or unheard can carry weight, intention, and power far beyond ordinary experience. Living silence may also serve as a medium for memory and history. Tales of the Mute Wind Desert or the Temple of Quiet Gods suggest that absence preserves more than sound. It preserves the essence of events, actions, and consciousness. Explorers often describe faint echoes of past travelers or sensations of emotions lingering in air or stone. This leads to the theory that silence can act as a living archive, storing fragments of human presence across time. Those sensitive to it may sense these layers, experiencing moments, fears, and intentions of those who came before. The effects of living silence on the mind are profound. Explorers often report enhanced clarity, but also an acute sense of vulnerability. In the absence of ordinary sound, thoughts, fears, and curiosity are magnified. Ordinary actions take on significance, every step and gesture observed by the attentive quiet. Dreams may revisit the experience, revealing shifting landscapes, echoing absences, or the subtle impression of consciousness lingering invisibly. For many, the experience is transformative, a reminder that perception is not solely dependent on sensory input, but is shaped by the presence of attentive stillness in the environment. Finally, living silence challenges the human assumption that life is always loud, present, and observable. It suggests that consciousness exists in forms beyond sound, motion, or ordinary perception. In this context, silence is not passive. It is alive, patient, and infinitely observant. It holds memory, reflects intention, and interacts with those who enter in ways both subtle and profound. Whether interpreted spiritually, psychologically, or scientifically, living silence remains one of the most enigmatic forces in the world, a presence that is sensed more than seen, heard more than spoken, and understood in ways that defy conventional measurement. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through living silence, one undeniable truth emerged. Silence is far more than an absence of sound. It is a force, a mirror, and a vessel for both perception and memory. Across deserts, valleys, and ancient temples, this stillness has demonstrated a remarkable ability to interact with human consciousness, responding subtly to thought, intention, and emotion. It can unsettle, teach, and transform, leaving those who encounter it with a heightened awareness of the unseen and the unspoken. Many explorers report that prolonged exposure to living silence leaves a lasting imprint. Ordinary environments suddenly feel louder, briefer noises sharper, and human presence more tangible. Some describe an internal resonance, a hum of awareness as though the brain has retained a connection to the attentive quiet experienced in those sacred or cursed spaces. Dreams often replay these encounters, with dunes shifting endlessly, shadows observing, and valleys swallowing imagined words. These echoes of silence reinforce the idea that it is not merely experienced externally, but imprinted on perception itself. Folklore and legend underscore this effect. Tales from around the world speak of travelers, priests, and wanderers who approached with reverence and were rewarded with insight, while those who entered carelessly were left disoriented, transformed, or haunted. Living silence in these stories is not a punishment but a teacher, a presence that responds not through action, but through attentive stillness. It reshapes understanding of space, time, and the unseen forces that surround us, revealing that even in the absence of noise, life is active, observant, and deliberate. Some scholars suggest that the phenomenon bridges science and mysticism. The neurological, psychological, and acoustic effects are measurable to a degree, but they do not fully capture the richness of human experience in these spaces. Silence interacts with thought and perception, creating phenomena that are both objective and subjective. The effect is cumulative. The environment holds memory, intention, and history, while the mind interprets, amplifies, and interacts with these elements. In this way, living silence becomes a co-creative force, shaping reality as much as the observer shapes the experience. Legends also propose that living silence functions as a boundary. Just as sacred spaces often separate the ordinary from the divine, these quiet zones delineate the human from the unseen, testing the awareness, humility, and respect of those who enter. In the deserts, valleys, and temples we have explored, silence imposes its own rules, teaching that intrusion is not always welcome. Yet observation with reverence can yield profound insight. The phenomenon is both protective and instructive, a subtle guardian that exists in stillness, patiently observing the flow of life around it. Ultimately, the study of living silence reveals a truth that is both simple and complex, that sound is not the only measure of life, and that absence can carry presence, memory, and awareness. The mute wind, the valley that swallows voices, and the temple of quiet gods all demonstrate that stillness can be deliberate, alive, and infinitely patient. It communicates through perception, intuition, and the subtle currents of consciousness, leaving an imprint that endures far beyond the physical experience. As we leave these haunted spaces behind, it is clear that silence is not emptiness. It is a teacher, a mirror, and a presence that shapes perception and memory in ways words cannot fully describe. Those who respect it find insight. Those who ignore it may find themselves disoriented. And all who encounter it are reminded that the unseen world is not always loud or visible. In the quiet, in the attentive absence, we discover a force as alive and deliberate as any storm or shadow. Living silence endures because it is both patient and observant, a force that transcends time and culture. It is the subtle awareness lingering in a muted desert, the attentive pressure in a temple, the memory of centuries in a silent valley. It challenges perception, transforms experience, and teaches lessons that resonate long after the journey ends. And so, the quiet remains, waiting for those who listen, watching those who enter, and shaping the world in the profound language of absence. In the end, living silence reminds us that some of the most potent forces are not loud, visible, or immediate. They are subtle, patient, and infinitely perceptive. They reside in absence, in stillness, and in the attentive quiet of the world. And for those willing to notice, the silence speaks, offering a dialogue that exists beyond words, beyond sound, and beyond ordinary understanding.